Hello, and welcome to Compose Carolina, a virtual summer music series presented by the UNC Department of Music and Carolina Performing Arts. I am Alan Anderson. I am a professor, a composer by inclination, and head of the composition area in the UNC Department of Music. Composition plays an important, though often unrecognized, role in all musicians' lives. It is closely related to improvisation, or the art of speaking through one's medium, of creating and ordering utterance, not so much out of thin air, but from an alertness to the possibilities for notes and rhythms, instruments, performers, and circumstance. Composition implies decisions and determinations. It is one of many ways that musicians learn to hear themselves and to understand the shapes of their musical experience. At UNC, we offer a number of classes related to music composition. In addition to a course called simply Composition, which considers music in its notated and largely instrumental forms without particular regard for genre or style, and which aims to help the student realize its individual compositional tendencies, we also offer jazz composition and arranging, songcraft, beat making, courses in music technologies, and improvisation, both as a dedicated study and as a mode of practice within an instrumental studio. And I will add, composition plays a role in the study otherwise called music theory. While the number of students weaving a path through one or more of these classes is somewhat difficult to tally, students taking composition, often for multiple semesters, number between 8 and 12 at any one time. The 6 composers featured in the Compose Carolina series have all been a part of that class. Their musical inclinations run to chamber music, solo writing for their own instrument, music for jazz band, film music, and free improvisation, but I wouldn't want to categorize any one of them too narrowly. Others who have studied composition at UNC have gone on to write for musical theater, video games, ventured into computer music and sound design, write orchestral music, or music for bands. Over 6 weeks, Compose Carolina is featuring students and recent alumni who have written original works that vary in style and instrumentation, but are connected by the common theme, looking forward, interpreted however these musicians pleased. My composition colleagues Stephen Anderson, whose work spans concert and jazz music, and Lee Weissert, whose work is fundamentally informed by wide-ranging music technologies, will join me in introducing and interviewing the featured composers. We're very excited to share what they've created. It's time to hear some music. Let's meet this week's Carolina composer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Compose Carolina. I am Alan Anderson. It's my pleasure to be with you today and be able to introduce 2 young composers. We have with us Noah Balamucki, who's signing in from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, as am I, and Fadi Khoury, who's coming to us from Dallas, Texas. Welcome, gentlemen. We look forward to hearing your music today and getting to know a little bit about how you've gone about writing and some things about yourself. First of all, maybe before we start this conversation, I just want to give my thanks to Carolina Performing Arts and to the Department of Music at UNC for putting this program together. Over 6 weeks this summer, with 1 week down already, we're getting a chance to hear the music of some young composers. Noah, in this case, is a graduate of the Department of Music at UNC, graduated in 2018. He took composition in every semester while he was there. He's also studied piano, sang in the chamber singers, so he had his hands and feet in and mouth, I guess, in a lot of different aspects of the music program. Fadi studied an undergraduate program at the University of North Texas, where while he was doing work in sounds and music for video games, he was also playing electric guitar, learning all about music synthesis and so forth. What brings the 2 together is that they are both enrolled in the screen scoring program in the Steinhardt School at New York University in Manhattan. They met there, and it's that sort of camaraderie and common thread of wanting to write music for film or for video in some form that has just make them decide to work on this project today together. We're going to hear a piece of them, a piece that they wrote together later on in the program. But I thought maybe first what we do get a sense of their origins, musical origins, what the music, maybe some early memories. Noah, would you sort of start off by telling us a bit about your background and maybe share a story or two about how you got music and composing, and maybe your interest in film music in general?
Yeah, so I was born in Michigan, and how did I get started with music? My mom told me I had to play an instrument, and I started with violin. I think it was between that or cello, and started playing that, just Suzuki tunes, and that was kind of actually unrelated from the film music side of things, because I talked with you. I think the origin story we decided on was that I went to a haunted house once in Michigan, and they played the Star Wars theme when you exited it, and I just remember weeks later trying to hum it and trying to remember this awesome tune and not really understanding what it was, but just loving the character of it.
Okay, it looks like we're back on the air. I feel I'm living the exciting life of a pioneer broadcaster. Let's see if we can pick up where we left off. Noah, you were relating a story about maybe your first cognizant experience of hearing some music related to film. You were at a Halloween haunted house sort of event, and then what happened?
The tune stuck with me, and I kept being interested in it. And basically, anytime I watched a film from that point on, I was interested in hearing the music. Although I was still too scared at that age to watch Star Wars, because I was a wuss. But yeah, I just kept listening to film music. I had a fourth grade teacher who brought in a CD of John Williams music, and by the end of the year, she gave that to me. And so I used to listen to it on my CD player, and coming to love all these tunes from Indiana Jones and Superman and E.T. And yeah, I just kept listening to more film music, seeing more movies, and growing to love it throughout my childhood.
When did you first put some notes on paper and say, hey, I wrote this, and this is my composition, and I may be a composer?
I wrote a small song in fourth grade that I don't count. And I guess the first thing I do count was in seventh grade. I just wrote a little piano tune. And that was, I showed it to my piano teacher, and she said, okay, well, let's develop this. Let's talk about music. She gave me some pieces to check out. Next year I wrote a band piece for my middle school band, and it just kind of went from there. I just tried writing pieces every now and then. I failed a lot. And every now and then I'd manage to write something that ultimately had a double bar line, and that felt good, and it just kind of kept going.
I had to be around 12 years old. So, it was 8 years into music. I'd say piano was still my primary instrument. I was very fortunate to watch Lord of the Rings in the theaters, and just seeing, like, that score is amazing, such a good score. And just seeing how it was, how it really helped and pushed the film along, and it made a real impact on me. And so that sort of stuck with me. And yeah, and then yeah, so that's pretty much what
I think that the two of you have probably had an experience that I have had. As composers, we sort of face the wonder of the people who aren't composers. How do those notes get on the page in the first place, or where do they come from? And it's part of our task. I think we have to sign on to this when we say we're composers. We're going to try to keep that some bit of a mystery, so that we don't have too many people getting into our territory. But nevertheless, I wonder if you could say something about the compositional process that created the piece that we're going to hear shortly. It's actually, in this case, the two of you collaborated on this. I'd like to hear something about the nature of that collaboration, and perhaps if the two of you written any music together before, first time for this, or just touch on that topic. Noah, would you maybe start off by maybe revealing a few of your secrets here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, people could just ask me. I'm not keeping them secret. So Fadi and I had worked.
Interrupt you 1 second, Noah. I'm going to interrupt you 1 second. People, the listeners, you are able to ask us questions in the chat should you want. Speaking of asking these composers detailed questions, so Noah, back to you about how this piece came together with the two of you working.
Yeah, Fadi and I had worked together previously on a homework assignment. This year, we had to create music for a sample library assignment. So creating hypothetical music for a celebrity scandal TV ad or some such thing, which was ridiculous and a lot of fun. Coming up with sounds together and playing off of each other's ideas, helping each other kill each other's babies. You know, just it was a lot of fun. Fadi is really good with mixing and making stuff sound good in the box, as it's called, on synthesized music, creating really cool sounds that don't require live performances. So for this project, I thought it'd be fun to work with him again. You know, I need to keep his social life up more than ever now that we're in a pandemic and personal interaction is scarce. So it was really nice to just get together with him every day at around 4 o'clock Eastern time and work on music, come up with sounds together, play what we wrote the night before off of each other, and then give ourselves little assignments for what we do that night. Fadi, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I want to jump in. Yeah, for sure. You know, it was really interesting, and you know, most of the time, whenever you collaborate with a composer, you know, particularly on a film project, you know, you might literally get the film and say, okay, I'm going to do this cue, you're going to do that cue. And you know, you split up whatever project you're working on. One call in the beginning. If you're live at the end, you know, good job. But so you never see the other composer, the other person you're collaborating with. And you know, that's been my experience for several collaborations, but this one was very different. In that it was actually a true collaboration, which is something, you know, I could say you know, in all the years I've done music composition, you know, I've never had that sort of collaboration. Like, most of the material that I wrote was written while Noah was on the Zoom chat with me. So it was, as you know, it was literally just bouncing ideas back and forth in real time, which was really cool and a really awesome workflow that, you know, I think I'm going to take on after this project. So yeah.
Great answer, guys. And I like how Fadi, you got there to the end about the almost real-time improvisational give and take that was the experience of working together on this. And I also like what Noah, you were saying about in a way, the two of you keep one another honest, because you know, the next day is coming and you got to come through with what you promised the night before. I want to talk about title here. Your piece is called Fall and Take Flight. I know that composers sometimes will have in their titles some hint about the nature of the content. Other times composers will put a title on there that might be actually a diversion and might not have anything to do with the music that's coming. And other times titles of pieces are just like, they feel like they're just keeping track of numbers, as in my 17th string quartet or something of that sort. But I wonder if you could tell us what the sort of significance of your title is, and perhaps, if it's true, how it relates to the sort of topic of the whole Compose Carolina series, the idea of looking forward. Fadi, you want to start with that? You know, Fall and Take Flight.
I think Noah would be better at answering this question, actually.
All right, Noah.
Yeah, so to explain the title for the project, we decided that we would interpret looking forward as thinking about the future. And, you know, we both love science fiction. We decided we would look at a couple of sci-fi futures that we enjoy. We talked about maybe doing an apocalypse scenario and a utopia scenario. And so we ended up going with dystopia. Fadi did sort of a John Carpenter Escape from New York vibe project that starts the first half of the piece. And so that, I guess, would be the fall, the idea of a civilization going downhill. And then because I've been binging Star Trek and kind of escaping into that universe all summer, I decided I would pay homage to the Star Trek film scores, which I absolutely adore. So the second part, the take flight part, is where I kind of just have fun creating my own space music and imagining my own adventures on a starship.
So it's very tempting. I would hope that the listeners here are thinking, oh, we're going to hear some music and maybe see a film, but alas, there's no film associated with this particular score. But I wondered if one of you or both of you potentially could comment on how your understanding of film music itself, and in fact, even thinking of the arc of a scene or or a longer segment of a film, has influenced the way that this piece itself develops. This is part of a question that might be otherwise framed as, what would you like your listeners to be listening for when they hear the piece? Noah, you want to give a shot?
Yeah, let me go ahead. I guess just the general arc of how the piece is developing and how it's moving. You'll probably notice as you're listening to it that there'll be very clear segments, and it's very much on purpose, and it's part of the development of the piece. So that's what I would say to really be listening for. And a lot of thought was put into the sound design and and how the melodic and motivic material develops. And yeah, Noah, do you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, I'll say for my part, most of the more stuff original to me that I worked on this project is on the tail end of the piece. That's the take flight Star Trek part, and it's got some action material. It jumps around. There's some cuts where I could imagine, two scenarios going on. You've got, the starship dealing with an asteroid field in one cut, and then at the same time, there's a crew on the ground of a distant planet, and they're trying to solve a problem. And so the music might cut back and forth between those. I didn't think about that when I wrote it. It's just that one of the reasons I've loved film music, even without the film, is that I love that jump, those quick smash cuts between different moods. It's very exciting to me. It's something that I think some people might think of as a limitation of film music, but I love it. I think it's so exciting. So yeah, look for that.
Okay, so I think we're ready. Just to the listeners, those who may have tuned in last week, there was a video associated with the performance of Eliana Fishbane's composition, but there's not going to be one for this. And I also make a suggestion: if any of you are not already listening with headphones, it might be helpful, because I tell you, this is a very vivid score that has been written for us, and you might actually be able to pick up a whole lot more details should you be listening with headphones. So I think we're ready to run the tape now, as it were. Here's Fall and Take. All right, guys, that was great. It has really this cinematic sweep. I don't think it's just the power of suggestion talking about film scores, but it certainly is that way, and that the sonic palette is really rich and various. I think maybe as a place to start talking about it is just maybe the two of you to give some insight on what is this sound world we're hearing. I mean, I hear things that sound like the string section or the horn section, and yet there's some things that I know an orchestra could never produce. There's some, like right at the beginning, there's this kind of hissy, distorted, I don't know, fluctuating, pulsing thing that's there that I know no orchestral instruments could produce. Maybe the two of you could just enlighten us all about what the world is like now for creating sounds, you know, like this. How are you making them? I mean, I guess there's no orchestra here. There's nobody who sat down and played this for you. Noah, you want to start addressing that?
Sure. I'll talk about some of the back end of it. So all the acoustic instruments you hear, violins and trumpets and stuff, are all sampled instruments. So a group of musicians got in a room and played every single note they possibly could, and those notes were recorded and programmed so that I can play them back on my keyboard. And then there were a lot of weird synthesized sounds, which I used to augment my part of the piece.
In general, you know, this sort of, yeah, I really gravitate towards that sort of, you know, I guess like openness towards sonic and timbre exploration. Yeah, and in terms of the synthesized sounds, both me and Noah were using Zebra so that we could send presets back and forth to each other, which is a really great synthesizer to, you know, I think to really get your hands on and really learn synthesis, because you could see the signal flow really easily. So it makes collaborating very, very easy in that sense.
So earlier, the two of you were talking about some sort of reference scenarios, like a dystopian experience, and then into the galaxies in a kind of Voyager sort of way. And but yet there's another way of listening to the music, of course, and that is sort of the moment to moment, what happens next kind of thing. And it develops very nicely with this layering of these small repeated patterns. They build, they add to one another up to the point then when a longer breathed horn tune comes in, the tune that will somewhere down the line will be retaken and rethought of by strings and so forth. So there's a kind of arc to it that is certainly very compelling, and I congratulate you both on that. I imagine this is tricky. How did the two of you sort of coordinate that? Was it like, how long is the tune going to be the first time? How long is it going to be the second time? How long does it need to be at the end? And how long is the little outro? You know, so any insider tricks there that you can disclose, or stories of the time, or it just felt right?
Oh God. Yeah, there tons of deliberations. The way that we put the theme throughout it was, first I sat at the piano for like 5 hours trying to come up with a good theme, and I came up with it. It's not as good as Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek scores, but it was good enough for this project. And then I started working on the second half, where it comes in the strings and woodwinds, and we worked on Fadi's section kind of separately from that. And what we started doing with Fadi's section, the beginning part, is saying, well, where can we start to insert some thematic ideas and put them in? So, you know, we put in an early statement of the theme and horns into Fadi's part. And then when I was working on the second half, doing all the Star Trek stuff, I was often asking Fadi, like, do we need to repeat this one more time? Does this section need to be developed? Like, do I need this slower string section rendition of the theme, or can I go straight into the grand finale? And so it was a lot of playing around with length of the melody, like whether we should truncate it in certain parts, whether the harmony had to change in certain parts to give it a different feel, if it was the middle section versus an end section. So yeah, there was a lot of deliberation that went into that.
Fadi, any comments you want to add to that?
I thought that was pretty good, how you described it. Yeah, I mean, it was just having that open communication and just bouncing ideas back and forth, and seeing each other's project, and just playing it back and forth. Like, hey, what do you think about this? Can you export this? Line. Let's see how it sounds like over this or that. So yeah, yeah, it was a fantastic experience, I'd say.
So one of our responsibilities as composers, and not only to find the tunes, to find the rhythms, to find the tempo, but it's to find the color. What instrument is playing what at what time. And I was really struck. It wasn't the first time I listened to the score, but to the recording, but I don't know, maybe the second or third time. I was struck how, Noah, you just alluded to the first time the Star Trek-like theme comes in the first time, and it's that really bright sound of, it seems like you're channeling French horns there. Yeah. And then later on, you use strings when that tune becomes elongated, and you actually let it find its end. I wonder, like, do you have any sense about the psychological effect you were going for there? And I will also, little insider information. I had to tell you what I'm about to say. I had to check. I had to go to my piano and check this out. But at the beginning of the piece, that tune and the horns is in E. And then when it comes in the strings, that warmer, richer sound, it's down a half step. It's an E flat. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really wonderful little moment there when that happens. But I wonder, from your perspective, if you have a sense about the psychological import of making that move.
Most of the first introduction of the theme for a lot of creative process here, the theme existed in that string thing you're talking about. That was the first thing I did. And I was, in terms of thinking about what I was doing, I was really channeling Jerry Goldsmith's cue Leaving Dry Dock from Star Trek The Motion Picture, which introduces his Star Trek theme in this long stirring string line with percussion, like xylophone playing those syncopated strikes. So I was thinking of it in terms of that sort of reference as a launching point. And that's how I thought of that music for much of the piece. And we were thinking, well, how are we going to tie in Fadi's part to this launch music? And we came up with, just as simple as taking the theme, putting it on a different instrument, and playing a version of it earlier in the piece. And French horn is something that we return to a lot with the theme in this piece. And it seemed powerful enough, robust enough to kind of stand out from the textures that Fadi was working with. So that's how it kind of became the intro. It's also a Star Trek thing to have a brass fanfare at the beginning. That's very much something that happens with the original Star Trek fanfare by Alexander Courage.
Yeah. So Fadi, I've been led to understand that it's the layering of little repeated figures was largely your doing and your contribution to this. You may correct me if I'm wrong, but about that. But one thing I really like is it doesn't go away. Even when the long, expansive, thematic, the sort of heroic tunes come in, that pulse is still residing behind. And so the sort of combination of all these things is again, pursues this idea of layers coming in a bit at a time. Any insights into writing multi-layered, repeated figures? Any insider information you can share?
Right, sure. So you know, with a lot of those layers, the way I like to construct them is I usually build modules, and I'll do this for a lot of projects because uh, uh, in general my writing style tends to gravitate towards just building these sort of ostinato, these repeating line sort of layers. So what I'll do generally is I'll build maybe a module with maybe 10 or 15 instruments in it, you know, usually with a mix of maybe pitch percussion or maybe like a solo violin legato patch. And what I'll do normally is I will literally put arpeggiators and transpose them so it's in the correct range of the instrument in general, so that I can like play a chord progression on the piano, and then it will sort of uh, it's you know it'll start building these sorts of layers. And with Noah's project, you know, I designed maybe 3 or 4 of these sorts of modules that I played around with to sort of achieve that. Um, and yeah, I mean, a lot of it is in terms of composing like that. It's knowing where what instrument, like literally, you know, where it fits in the frequency spectrum. So it's just an awareness. It's like a sonic awareness that you need to develop and say if you're going into writing in this style.
Yeah. So I got kind of a, maybe this verges on a philosophical question. We all know that to have an orchestra at one's disposal is rather expensive. And so for the purposes of creating music as you have, you've relied, as Noah was explaining earlier, about these samples in sound libraries, and you access them and use them to create the sound. And now we heard this composition of yours. Is this where it resides as we heard it, or is there a longing to in fact get an orchestra in the room and have them play the orchestral parts with perhaps the synthesized parts going against them, or even the synthesized parts and maybe in some instances realized by orchestral instruments?
For my part, there's definitely a longing to have live instruments play this stuff. If I had been able to approach this any way I wanted, probably large parts of it would be pretty orchestral. That said, synths do create some pretty cool sounds, some that have been part of Star Trek in the past and some that just are fun to use on projects like this. So there's a mix of wanting live instruments in all the cases that I wrote live instrument parts here, like the strings and horns. That's true, but keeping the synth elements is something that I would like to do too. So yeah, the acoustic instruments are things that are sampled out of necessity. And the synth stuff, some of that is also true out of necessity to kind of amplify and make the acoustic instruments sound better, but some of that is just really thinking about how acoustic instruments and synths and electronics can work well together. And that is a really cool part of working with these digital audio workstations, as they're called.
Yeah.
Could I also answer this? Would that be okay?
Sure. Then we're going to get to some questions from the listeners.
So, you know, philosophically speaking, whenever we're working in a DAW and we're composing in this fashion, it's a little bit different than whenever you're writing for sheet music and it's being interpreted from by a performer, in that you're also responsible for the performances. Not only are you crafting the composition, but also you're crafting the performance. And so that's something to always keep in mind, because a lot of the time isn't necessarily in writing the music. It's automating what's called, you know, MIDI CCs, and basically crafting and sculpting the performance. So if you take on this kind of composing, that's something to really keep in mind, that there is this philosophical difference.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for. So here's a question that has come in from one of the viewers, listeners. And a question that as composers, we actually get this one fairly often, but I'm curious to know the answer too. How long did it take you to compose this particular piece of music?
I mean, it'll depend. The answer will be different between me and Fadi. You know, we spent somewhere between an hour to 3 hours working on it together, probably 5 days a week for a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, something like that. And then in addition to that, yeah, and then I spent, you know, 4 or 5 hours trying to come up with a theme before that process started, and then for working on that back half of the piece, coming up with all the different sections and working out the theme and picking my instruments and stuff, that could be like 8 or 9 hours a day for 3 or 4 days of the process. So it took a lot of time over a very short period of time.
Yeah, but it is pretty impressive that from beginning to end, it was like a week and a half, right?
Yeah.
That's good. You guys can really work on a close deadline. I guess that's part of the profession. So let me see. Let me read this question. When you are composing for a moment that is exciting or action-filled, presumably reference to a film, what instruments, timbres, musical devices do you find most effective? So you
Fadi,
imagine somebody...
Particularly for film? I wonder, is this question particularly for like a film scene, or just like in general? Like, I mean, I would say if we're talking in general, I would probably gravitate towards some sort of heavy percussion sounds, with a lot of compression. Just in general, awesome. Yeah, so just like heavy percussion, I would gravitate, you know, towards really low, heavy guitar and bass guitar with a lot of distortion, and really dark synthesizers. That's generally where my aesthetic sort of takes me in that sense. But it's more of an aesthetic choice. You can accomplish the same emotion any number of different ways.
Noah, can you think of a moment from one of your film scores? Maybe that you would say that person did it. That's really it.
Oh, that's a hard question. I've got whole playlists of different styles of action. The TIE Fighter music from Star Wars 4: A New Hope is really good. John Williams has some great syncopated rhythms. I love the use of 7/8 for action cues. A lot of my music for like 2 or 3 years was heavily inspired by Jerry Goldsmith's action material from Rambo: First Blood Part 2, where there's a ton of syncopated rhythms, or like 3+2+3 or 2+2+3. So mixed meters, especially when I'm doing concert work, I love using a lot of those, and just really dramatic themes in an association with really fast runs on different instruments. The Adventures of Robin Hood, the final duel at the end, is fantastic, for instance.
And what instruments are there in that scene?
In that scene, it's actually a pretty small ensemble, but strings, some brass, and there's some xylophone actually towards the end of it to kind of build a sense of increasing tension. It's a lot of yum ba da dum bum 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 yum ba da dum bum 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 bum, and it just dum ba da dum bum bum ba da dum. It's got these phrases that get shorter and shorter and shorter between major events, and then there will be a pause in the strings while you take a breath, and then you're right back in it. So contrast is important in action cues, and a lot of film music in general.
Good answers. You guys know your stuff. We're getting really close to the end, and I'm going to ask one, again, looking into the future question, and maybe this is a sort of short answer for each of you. If your dream project came in tomorrow, what would it be? What's the score you really would love to write? Either one of you.
Do you
Who's got an idea?
I'll go ahead and go first. I mean, anything that just requires really heavy, distorted guitar and really dark synthesizer sort of sounds. You know, maybe some sort of crime drama or something like that. Nothing really in particular, just something that sort of leans towards a specific aesthetic. How about you, Noah?
For me, an adventure in space on a grand scale like Star Trek or Star Wars, or alternately, an adventure in the Old West. Westerns and space operas are my favorite musical genres, so to speak.
Well, those mythical places, the galaxy and the West, will have a lot of room, and I hope that there are some agents out there paying attention, and you guys will be getting these offers any day. So Noah and Fadi, thank you very much for your writing a piece for this series and for talking with us today. I think it's probably time for you guys to get back to work on your next project. Thanks a lot, everybody. It's a great show.
All right. Thank you, Professor. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.